The Stoic cure for overthinking. Master silence before it breaks you. You're not exhausted because your body is overworked. You're exhausted because your mind won't shut up. You lie in bed at night replaying conversations that already happened, predicting disasters that never will, and drowning in questions that have no answers. You call it thinking, but it's not. It's mental noise dressed in urgency. It feels responsible. It feels necessary. But it's quietly breaking you. You scroll for hours trying to escape it, but it only gets louder. You read, you plan, you even meditate, yet silence remains a stranger. And the scariest part? You've begun to believe this chaos is normal, that living with your mind in overdrive is just part of being driven. But what if it's not? What if you've confused motion for meaning, noise for wisdom, urgency for clarity? There's a reason you can't hear your own intuition anymore. There's a reason you always feel behind, even when everything's done. You're not failing because you're not doing enough. You're suffering because you've lost the ability to stop. And silence, real soul-level stillness, terrifies you, because it forces you to face what all the noise is trying to hide. The Stoics knew this kind of suffering. They didn't have social media, but they had war, betrayal, ambition, and loss. And through it all, they discovered something we've almost forgotten. Silence isn't weakness. It's power. It's clarity. It's a rebellion against the mental noise that ruins your focus, poisons your peace, and keeps you stuck in endless loops of thought. What if the cure for overthinking isn't more thinking? What if it's the exact opposite? What if mastering silence is the only way to survive the noise before it breaks you? The hidden enemy. Overthinking doesn't look dangerous. It looks like preparation. It sounds like intelligence. It feels like control. But behind its mask is something darker. Fear disguised as logic. You tell yourself you're being thorough, that you're just being careful, that you need a little more time before making the decision, sending the message, taking the step. But the truth is, you're stalling. You're drowning in mental noise because deep down, you're afraid of what happens when the thinking stops. Overthinking is not thinking too much. It's thinking without end, thought without direction, motion without movement. It's not a gift. It's an addiction to noise, to certainty, to the illusion of control. You become mentally claustrophobic, unable to sit still with a single thought, so you grab 5 more and start spinning. Not because you're weak, but because no one ever taught you how to stop. And that's where the enemy hides. Not in the thoughts themselves, but in your relationship with them. You've let your mind become a tyrant. Every idea demands your attention. Every fear gets a seat at the table. You obey every question it asks, forgetting that not every thought deserves an answer, and not every voice inside your head is yours. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly. In his meditations, he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." He wasn't just talking about events. He was talking about thoughts, those internal events that spiral and magnify because we give them power they never earned. Most people think their anxiety is a flaw in their system. It's not. It's a symptom of a deeper disorder, mental overstimulation. We're exposed to more information in a single day than the ancient Stoics were in a lifetime. Our brains weren't built for this volume of input. They weren't meant to be on call 24/7, scrolling, planning, analyzing, replaying. And so the mind begins to fray. And you call it just how I am. But what if overthinking isn't your identity? It's your habit. And what if silence is the antidote? The problem is, silence doesn't feel safe anymore. That's the trap. You've been conditioned to equate stillness with laziness, rest with weakness, non-reactivity with indifference. So you keep running, not from the world, but from your own presence. Because if you stop, even for a moment, the truth might catch up to you. You've been trained to think that being busy is being productive, but there's a difference between being active and being effective. The Stoic doesn't just act, they choose their action. The modern mind moves because it's afraid to be still. The Stoic mind is still because it refuses to be moved by fear. So the real question is this: when did you stop owning your thoughts and start obeying them? Because until you answer that, overthinking will keep wearing different names: stress, anxiety, preparation, intelligence, and you'll keep falling for the disguise. The ancient mirror. Picture this: the most powerful man in the world, draped in armor, commanding legions, facing betrayal from his closest allies, governing an empire on the brink of collapse. And yet each night, instead of turning to generals or philosophers, he turns to himself. Alone with ink and parchment, Marcus Aurelius doesn't write orders. He writes reminders, not to others, but to his own mind. Because even as Emperor of Rome, Marcus knew his greatest enemy wasn't the battlefield, it was within. In the silence of his tent, with war drums echoing in the distance, he penned words not of conquest, but of control, of taming his thoughts, of watching his impulses, of mastering his mind. And that's what makes the Stoics so dangerous, so relevant even now. They weren't removed from the chaos of life. They were in it. They felt the weight of the world just like you do, the pressure to be strong, the fear of loss, the burden of responsibility. But they discovered something few modern minds ever will. True power is found not in reaction, but in restraint. Seneca wrote letters to friends about the value of being alone with your thoughts, of withdrawing from society. Not to escape the world, but to learn how to face it from a position of inner command. Epictetus, once a slave, taught that freedom has nothing to do with external chains and everything to do with mental discipline. These men weren't monks. They were warriors of the mind, and still they sat in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they refused to speak before mastering their own reaction. Now compare that to the modern world, where stillness is a threat, where people fill every pause with scrolling, every second of quiet with commentary, every discomfort with distraction. It's not just that we can't be silent, it's that we don't want to be. Because silence reveals what the noise has buried: fear, doubt, regret, loneliness, shame. But the Stoics weren't afraid to look. They stood still in the storm and chose presence over panic. They wrote their thoughts down, not to share but to see. They examined every assumption, every emotion, every fear. And in doing so, they discovered something that feels almost forgotten today. Your thoughts are not facts, your emotions are not orders, and your mind is not your master. This is what Marcus meant when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That wasn't philosophy. That was a survival tactic. Because in a world full of distractions, the greatest rebellion is to turn inward and reclaim your attention. So when you sit alone, overwhelmed, and your thoughts begin to spiral, remember, the most powerful man in the world once did the same, and he chose silence, not because he was weak, but because he knew it was the only way to hear the truth. The power of voluntary silence. Silence isn't passive. It isn't doing nothing. True silence, the kind the Stoics practiced, is an act of resistance. It's you refusing to be pulled by every emotion, every notification, every thought demanding a reaction. It's discipline in its most invisible form. And in today's world, that makes it one of the rarest and most powerful forms of control you can possess. You've been told silence is emptiness, that if you're quiet, you're disconnected, disengaged, indifferent. But the Stoics saw silence not as void, but as strategy. It wasn't escape. It was preparation. In the quiet, they sharpened their judgment. In the pause, they observed their impulses. In the stillness, they trained their response. They knew, the moment you react to everything, you've given away your freedom. You've likely felt it. Those seconds before you respond to a message, open your mouth in an argument, or take a decision under pressure. That moment, right before you act, is where power either gets seized or surrendered. The Stoics built that moment into a practice, a system, a weapon. Epictetus said it plainly, "Let silence be your general rule, or say only what is necessary and in few words." That's not about muting your voice, it's about training your mind to hold the line, to delay the reaction long enough to reclaim agency. Because the person who can pause, who can sit inside discomfort without trying to escape it, is the one who cannot be controlled. Modern society has no use for silence. Algorithms are built to reward constant output. Your attention is prey. Your mind is being hijacked not just by media, but by the habit of constant stimulation. You wake up and check your phone before you check in with yourself. You speak before you understand. You react before you reflect. And the result? Mental exhaustion that feels like productivity, emotional burnout that masquerades as grind. The Stoics understood that silence isn't silence until it's chosen. That's the key. You don't stumble into stillness. You train for it. You decide not to react. You build space between the trigger and the response, not because it feels good, but because that space is where power lives. So try this. Next time your thoughts start racing, or someone pushes your buttons, don't respond, don't flinch, don't fidget. Just stop. Take a single breath, then another. Count to 7. Say nothing. Do nothing. Let the noise pass over you like wind over stone. That's the Stoic pause. Not repression, not avoidance, just tactical stillness. In that pause, your clarity returns. Your presence sharpens. You begin to notice the storm isn't in the world, it's in your interpretation of it. And from that place, you no longer need to raise your voice, because nothing is louder than the silence of someone who is completely in control. Master that, and you master yourself. Weaponizing stillness. Stillness isn't a luxury. It's a battlefield. It's where you fight your most invisible wars, against your impulses, your fears, your past, your imagined futures. And if you train there, you win elsewhere. Because the world doesn't need more speed, more noise, more reaction. It needs people who can sit inside the chaos and remain unmoved, not because they don't feel it, but because they've trained for it. Most people speak to escape themselves. They fill the air with noise so they don't have to confront the silence. They scroll, complain, explain, defend, because it's easier than facing their own thoughts. But the Stoic doesn't speak to be heard. The Stoic speaks when speech serves a purpose. The rest of the time, they remain still, because they understand that the most powerful response is often no response at all. And that kind of stillness doesn't come naturally. It's forged, earned, practiced. You train for it like a warrior trains for war. Not with weapons, but with restraint. Not with armor, but with attention. Start small, sit for 10 minutes a day with no input, no phone, no music, no planning. Just you, your breath, and the noise inside your head. Let it scream. Let it resist. Let it do whatever it wants. Your only task is not to run. Because that screaming, that's the purge, that's your mind detoxing from a life of distraction. And if you can sit through it, you're already winning. That's what modern people don't understand. Stillness isn't absence. It's intensity without movement. It's the eye of the storm. The warrior who doesn't flinch when challenged. The leader who pauses before responding. The person who doesn't post just because they're angry. That kind of stillness commands respect, because it cannot be provoked. Seneca wrote, No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. That applies not just to external challenges, but to internal ones. Stillness is adversity, because in it, everything you've avoided comes to the surface. But that's the point. That's where the training happens. You sit in silence not to relax, but to refine, to burn away the lies, to hear what's real beneath the noise, to stop reacting to every emotion like it's a command. Because until you do that, your mind will always be a battlefield you're losing. So the next time you feel like you're about to break, don't reach for noise, don't seek comfort, seek stillness. Not the soft kind, but the hard kind. The kind that feels like standing in freezing water and refusing to move. That's where strength is born. And once you've trained there, nothing the world throws at you can shake you, because you've already faced the worst chaos of all, your own mind, and you didn't run. The consequences of noise. Noise doesn't just distract, it destroys. Slowly, quietly, without warning. It doesn't show up like a car crash. It builds like corrosion, inside your thoughts, your energy, your relationships. And by the time you realize it's happening, the damage is already deep. You think you're tired because you've done too much. But most of your exhaustion doesn't come from action. It comes from reaction. Constant input, constant response, constant pressure to comment, to keep up, to stay connected. It's not your schedule that's burning you out. It's the lack of space between your thoughts. And when you lose that space, you lose everything. Your clarity, your creativity, your ability to connect. Noise makes you reactive, paranoid, defensive. You mistake panic for purpose. You confuse motion for meaning. You overthink simple decisions and underthink critical ones. You talk more but say less. You work more but accomplish less. You're not living, you're buffering. This is what happens when you don't master silence. It begins to erode your foundation. Slowly, your relationships start to feel fragile, not because people changed, but because you're never fully present. You're distracted even when you're listening. You're distant even when you're there. You can't sit through a moment of tension without checking out or lashing out. And maybe you've noticed something deeper. You're becoming someone you don't quite recognize. Shorter-tempered, more anxious, easily overwhelmed, constantly behind, even when everything's done. It feels like the world is speeding up, but really it's your mind that's losing rhythm. Because when you're drowning in noise, even peace feels unfamiliar. Marcus Aurelius warned us, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But what if you've lost access to that retreat? What if you don't even remember the way back? Because noise doesn't just affect how you think. It shapes who you are. And if you don't draw the line, if you don't reclaim the silence, the world will mold you into someone reactive, insecure, and shallow. Not because you are those things, but because that's what survives in a loud environment. It's like trying to write poetry during an earthquake. You can't create, you can't reflect, you can't build. All you can do is survive, but you weren't built to just survive. And this is the real cost. When you don't master silence, you don't just lose peace, you lose yourself. You become a reflection of the noise around you. And worst of all, you begin to fear the very thing that could save you, stillness. Because stillness will show you the truth. It will show you that your anxiety isn't from doing too little, but from never being fully where you are. That your stress isn't because life is too fast, but because you've forgotten how to slow yourself down. That your disconnection isn't from others, but from your own mind, overstimulated and under-disciplined. And if you don't stop, if you don't decide to draw that line, then yes, the silence will still come. But not the kind that heals, the kind that breaks, the kind that shows up as burnout, as collapse, as a forced reset from a mind that can't carry the weight anymore. So ask yourself before that happens, What will it cost you to stay noisy? And what might you recover if you chose silence on purpose? The return to inner command. At some point, you have to stop blaming the noise and start reclaiming the volume knob. Because the truth is, no one is coming to quiet your mind for you. The world won't pause, the feed won't end, the demands won't ease up. There is no perfect moment, no golden hour when silence will arrive and offer you peace like a gift. That moment doesn't exist. You have to build it, you have to claim it, you have to command it. This is where the Stoic separates from the crowd, not because they don't feel overwhelmed, but because they refuse to let it define them. They don't wait for silence, they choose it. They don't beg for peace, they generate it. Even when life is loud, especially when it's loud, you have that power too. But you've handed it over, little by little. Every time you opened your phone before opening your eyes, every time you filled the space instead of sitting with it, every time you reacted instead of restrained. But it's not gone, it's just untrained. And you can train it again. Start small. One breath between thought and action. One moment of awareness before your next reaction. 1 hour a week where your attention belongs to no one but yourself. You don't need a retreat. You need a ritual, a return to your own inner command post. And when your thoughts race, let them. When the urge to reply, scroll, explain, defend arises, watch it, then let it pass. This is the beginning of inner sovereignty. Not fighting your thoughts, but no longer obeying them. Not controlling the world, but choosing not to be controlled by it. You are not your noise. You are not your reactions. You are not your worst moments of mental chaos. You are what remains when everything unnecessary is stripped away. And what remains is powerful, clear, focused, unshakable. Epictetus said it best. No man is free who is not master of himself. Freedom is not found in perfect circumstances. It's found in stillness, in restraint, in the calm you create inside yourself, no matter what the world throws at you. So ask yourself honestly, have you been thinking too much or listening too little? Are you trying to solve chaos with more chaos? Or are you finally ready to return to the part of you that never needed to shout, never needed to race, never needed the noise? Because you're not a victim of your thoughts, you're the commander of them. But only if you remember that silence isn't absence, it's access. Access to who you were before the world got too loud. The myth of more input. We live in an age of information, but we suffer from a famine of clarity. You read more than you ever have. You listen to podcasts on double speed, you save quotes, scroll through advice, chase after wisdom like it's just one more swipe away. But deep down, you're not getting calmer, you're not getting clearer, you're just getting full. And not in a nourishing way, full like a cup that's spilling over, unable to hold even one more drop. This is the trap no one warns you about. More input doesn't mean more understanding. It often means the opposite. The more voices you let in, the harder it becomes to hear your own. The more you learn without space to reflect, the more disconnected you feel from what you already know. Knowledge becomes noise. Growth becomes a form of escapism. And silence, the soil where clarity grows, gets buried beneath all the stimulation. The Stoics didn't consume endlessly. They contemplated. They returned to the same truths again and again, not to be entertained but to be transformed. Seneca warned of this very thing when he said, "If you are everywhere, you are nowhere." He wasn't just talking about physical location, he meant mental presence, depth over width, essence over accumulation. But modern culture has convinced you otherwise. You're told that every free moment must be filled with something productive. So you start using silence as a loading screen, just a brief pause between scrolls. You tell yourself you're growing, but if you're honest, most of your input is driven by fear. Fear of missing out, fear of falling behind, fear that if you stop absorbing, you'll become irrelevant. But wisdom doesn't come from more. It comes from less, made meaningful. From the same idea, revisited with a sharper mind, from space between the notes, not just more notes. And that's why silence is so threatening to the modern mind, because it doesn't offer stimulation, it demands digestion. The Stoics treated silence as a form of intellectual fasting. Just as the body needs rest from constant food, the mind needs time away from endless ideas. Not because ideas are bad, but because unfiltered input leads to mental indigestion, confusion, paralysis. And that's what overthinking really is, a mind trying to chew everything it's been fed without ever swallowing. So if you feel overwhelmed, unclear, like you know so much, and yet somehow feel lost, step back. Don't add more. Subtract. Put down the books. Turn off the feed. Stop the stream of expert opinions. Sit with what you already know. Give it weight. Give it silence. Give it time. Because until you do that, you're not learning, you're hoarding. You're not evolving, you're buffering. You're not wise, you're just informed. And the Stoic knows the difference. Marcus Aurelius didn't write new truths every day. He returned to the same ones. Repetition was his sharpening stone. Silence was his testing ground. Stillness was where knowledge became character. That's the path. That's the cure. Because your mind doesn't need more voices. It needs room to hear your own. The noise within the body. Silence isn't just something you hear. It's something you feel. And overthinking doesn't just wear out the mind. It burns through the body. Every racing thought, every unfinished loop, every imagined outcome your brain rehearses again and again, it all has a cost. And that cost is paid by your nervous system. You might think your body is tired from working hard, but often it's not the work, it's the anticipation of work. It's the mental rehearsal of disasters, the endless simulations of conversations that haven't happened, the emotional tension of trying to control everything through thought. You're exhausted not because life is heavy, but because your mind won't put the weight down. When the Stoics spoke of mastering the mind, they weren't ignoring the body. They saw the two as inseparable. A chaotic mind agitates the body. A calm mind steadies it. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to breathe, to return to the present moment, to feel the simplicity of being alive without judgment. That wasn't poetic reflection. It was nervous system regulation centuries before we gave it a name. You can feel the difference, the tight chest, the clenched jaw, the shallow breath. That's what noise feels like underneath your skin. And the worst part, most people walk around with this tension constantly and think it's normal. It's not. It's just common. Because the world teaches you how to think more, plan more, prepare more, but it never teaches you how to release. And the truth is, no amount of planning will save you if your body is living in a constant state of subtle panic. That's what overthinking really is, a physiological loop. You think, your body reacts, and that reaction creates more thoughts. It's a closed circuit of anxiety disguised as productivity. The Stoic knew the way out. Return to what you control, return to the breath, return to posture, return to presence, return to what is now, not what might happen. This is why Epictetus, who limped from a broken leg inflicted by his master, never spoke of his pain with resentment. He had trained himself to observe discomfort without exaggerating it, to let it pass through without nesting in the body. And that's your challenge too. Not to eliminate stress completely, but to stop carrying it in places it doesn't belong. Your shoulders are not meant to hold the weight of imagined outcomes. Your gut isn't designed to process emotional guilt from yesterday's decisions. Your hands weren't made to tremble from unread messages and unsaid words. But your mind has tricked your body into thinking it's always under threat, and your body has obeyed. So what do? You start by getting quiet, not just mentally but physically. You stop trying to think your way out of tension. You feel your way through it. You stop negotiating with every anxious thought. You drop back into your breath. You notice where you're clenching, holding, resisting, and you let go, slowly, deliberately, repeatedly. Stillness isn't just something you practice sitting cross-legged in a quiet room. It's something you carry into every movement, into the way you walk, the way you eat, the way you speak. Silence is the absence of internal force, and when you master it, your body begins to trust you again. Your nervous system stops preparing for war every time your phone buzzes. Your energy stops leaking into imaginary futures, and your presence returns, not as an idea but as a felt experience. That's why silence matters, not because it's noble, but because it's healing. It's how you step out of the mental cage and let the body breathe again, because no mind is truly free until the body can rest. The discipline of listening. Everyone wants to be heard, but almost no one wants to listen. Not really. Because listening demands something most people have forgotten how to give: presence. Not nodding while you prepare your reply, not waiting for your turn to speak, but full, alert silence. And that kind of silence is rare because it's uncomfortable. We're used to reacting, jumping in, defending, correcting, adding something of our own. But that's not listening. That's waiting to speak. And the louder your own mind is, the harder it becomes to hear anyone else. Overthinking doesn't just sabotage your inner life. It corrupts your relationships. You bring the noise with you. You listen through filters. You interpret what they're saying as if it's about you. And without realizing it, you stop hearing what's actually being said. The Stoics understood this danger. They trained themselves to listen as a form of humility, to suspend judgment, to receive before responding. Epictetus, who taught through dialogue, believed that true wisdom begins with disciplined silence. "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth," he said, "so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But that discipline takes effort, because listening isn't passive. It's active stillness. It means holding back the urge to insert yourself. It means hearing even what's not said, the emotion behind the words, the intention behind the tone. It means quieting your need to fix, correct, or compete, and instead allowing the other person's thoughts to exist without interruption. And when you do that, when you give someone the full weight of your attention, everything changes. You stop playing mental chess. You stop looking for angles. You begin to see the other person not as a problem to solve, but as a mirror, a window, a human being with their own noise, their own storms, their own longing to be understood. But here's the paradox. You can't listen to others until you've practiced listening to yourself, and most people never have. They drown out their own inner signals. They override instincts. They explain away gut feelings. And then they wonder why their relationships feel thin, transactional, surface level. The discipline of listening is about training presence, first within, then outward. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to fill the space, because they are the space, calm, still, aware. And in a world of overtalkers, that kind of presence is magnetic, disarming, transformative. You don't have to offer the perfect advice. You don't need the best comeback. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is to let another person empty their noise into your silence, not because you're a sponge, but because you've done the work. You've cleared the inner clutter. You've made room. And what happens when 2 people do that for each other, when they listen without rushing, without pretense, without noise, isn't just connection. It's communion. The Stoics weren't known for speeches, they were known for clarity, and clarity begins in silence. If you want to master overthinking, don't just learn how to quiet your mind. Learn how to quiet your mouth and open your ears, because the discipline of listening is the doorway to wisdom. And no noise will ever teach you what presence will. The courage to stand alone. There is a silence louder than any applause, the silence that follows when you choose to walk alone, not out of arrogance, not because you're better, but because your inner peace no longer fits inside the noise of the crowd. Choosing silence doesn't just set you apart mentally, it sets you apart socially, and that's where most people hesitate. Because they're not just afraid of stillness, they're afraid of being seen as different, of being misunderstood, of being left behind while the world rushes ahead. And so, they keep speaking when nothing needs to be said. They keep posting even when they have nothing to share. They stay in conversations that drain them, environments that distract them, routines that bury their stillness under a pile of performance. But the Stoic has already made peace with solitude, because they understand that not every path has company, not every decision earns praise. Sometimes the right thing feels like exile. And yet, it's in that quiet distance that self-respect is built. In that emptiness, character grows. Musonius Rufus, the lesser-known but deeply respected Roman Stoic, was exiled more than once for his beliefs. And still, he wrote that exile is but a change of place, not a loss of virtue. He didn't seek crowds. He didn't crave validation. He trained his students not to belong to the noise, but to belong to truth. And truth more often than not walks alone. That's the hidden price of mastering silence. You become more sensitive to shallowness. You can no longer pretend to be interested in small talk. You notice when people speak just to be seen or argue just to be right. And while others blend into the chaos, you begin to step back, not with judgment, but with clarity. Not because you're cold, but because you've stopped negotiating with noise. But make no mistake, this isn't easy. It takes courage to pause in a world that praises speed. It takes courage to rest when everyone else is grinding. It takes courage to be misunderstood, intentionally. To let others think what they will while you stay loyal to what's true. And it takes courage to trust that your worth doesn't need a witness, that your peace doesn't need applause, that your silence doesn't need to be explained. This is where most people break, not from pressure but from loneliness, because silence creates space. And in that space, your illusions about who you need to be start to fall apart. You're left with yourself, unfiltered, unliked, unshared. And you either run from that, or you rise into it. The Stoics chose to rise. They stood alone, not to isolate, but to integrate. They didn't run from society. They returned to it differently, more grounded, less reactive, more able to serve because they no longer needed to prove. So if the silence is making you feel separate, that's not failure, that's a sign of transformation. You're not leaving the world behind. You're just stepping out of its noise long enough to hear your own voice again. And when you do return, you won't need to shout. You won't need to convince, because your presence will say everything. The courage to stand alone is the beginning of leadership, not of others, but of yourself. Beyond silence, the art of measured speech. Silence is not the destination. It's the discipline that makes speech sacred again. You don't train in silence to remain quiet forever. You train in silence so that when you speak, your words carry weight, precision, integrity. You speak because it serves something greater than your ego, because it adds clarity to the moment, not noise to the room. But that's not what the world teaches. The world teaches that volume equals value, that if you're not talking, you're invisible, that if you're not broadcasting your thoughts, you don't matter. And so most people speak out of fear, not wisdom. They talk to avoid silence, to prove they're present, to fill the discomfort. But their words land flat, because they were born out of reaction, not reflection. The Stoics knew better. Their silence wasn't suppression, it was preparation. It was their filter, their fire test. Before a word left their mouth, it had to pass through purpose. They didn't just ask, is it true? They asked, is it necessary? Is it useful? Is it kind? And if it failed any one of those, silence remained the better answer. That's what made their speech powerful, because it was rare, intentional, devoid of vanity, and in that scarcity, every word became a tool, not a weapon, not a signal, a tool used carefully with craftsmanship to build bridges, create understanding, or cut through confusion. Seneca reminded us that speech, if brief, is not only more pleasant, it is also more effective. But brevity doesn't mean shallowness. It means removing the fluff, getting to the marrow of truth, saying what must be said, and then stopping, leaving space for the words to land. This is a radical act in today's world, because the default mode is over-communication, endless commentary, forced vulnerability, pretend wisdom, words used to manipulate, impress, or distract. But the Stoic chooses a different path. They know that words are sacred, that once spoken they cannot be taken back, that the more you say, the more likely you are to betray your own discipline. So they wait, they breathe, they let the silence do most of the talking, and then when the moment truly calls for it, they speak, not to be heard but to be of service. Their speech becomes rare and memorable, not because it's loud, but because it's clean, and you can feel it when it happens. The person who doesn't speak often, but when they do, everyone stops scrolling. The person who doesn't give advice unless you ask, but when they do, it stays with you for years. The person who doesn't dominate the room, but commands it by how little they need to say. That's the art of measured speech, and it's not learned through speaking. It's earned in silence, in restraint, in knowing yourself well enough that you don't need to prove anything through words. So train in quiet. Let your thoughts sharpen. Let your presence speak first. And when you do open your mouth, let it be an extension of your stillness, not a break from it. Because in a world that never stops talking, the rarest voice is the one that knows when to speak and when to stay silent. Let today be the last day you let that noise lead your life. If this message found you at the right moment, it wasn't by accident. Subscribe. Stay here. We go deeper in the next video, not into more information, but into inner mastery. The Stoics won't save you, but they'll remind you of who you were always meant to be.